March 12, 1961, outskirts of Wittenberg, East Germany. The early morning fog clung to the skeletal frame of the abandoned chemical factory, muffling the distant hum of trains on the railway that cut through the town. Rusted catwalks swayed slightly in the chill wind, and shards of broken glass crunched underfoot as you stepped into the main hall. The air smelled of wet concrete, oil, and a faint tang of something metallic, like blood mixed with iron filings. Inside, Lieutenant Karl Brenner of the Stasi's Covert Technical Division moved cautiously, his boots echoing off the cavernous walls. He adjusted the strap of his satchel, heavy with blueprints and sensitive documents, and squinted through the dust-laden sunlight filtering from shattered skylights. Nothing should have been here, at least, nothing that wasn't rotting away for decades. Yet beneath the decaying conveyor belts and broken vats, there was a strange order: freshly welded steel supports, faint chemical stains that didn't belong to years of neglect, and the unmistakable hum of machinery hidden behind false walls. You could feel it, the factory wasn't abandoned. Every corner seemed alive with a quiet energy, as if the building itself was breathing. Karl's radio crackled with a static-laced voice from headquarters, but the words were meaningless against the realization settling over him. Someone had been working here, in secrecy, for years. Weapons prototypes, experimental devices that defied conventional design, had been tested and refined under the noses of an unsuspecting town. A shadow moved across the far end of the hall. Not human, Karl thought at first, but the flicker of a uniform beneath the dim light confirmed it. Guards, or scientists, patrolling, always alert, always aware that every step could be watched. And yet, in plain sight, the factory had blended perfectly into the surrounding industrial decay, invisible to all but those who knew where to look. The metallic scent grew sharper as Karl descended a narrow staircase, leading to a hidden sublevel. Here, the walls were lined with machinery that whirred softly, powered by generators concealed under layers of rubble and dust. On a steel table, prototypes of unusual devices lay scattered: small, angular drones, experimental detonators, and weapons that seemed decades ahead of what the world believed was possible. As Karl leaned closer, a faint vibration hummed through the floor, almost imperceptible but insistent. The factory was alive, testing itself, pushing forward unseen in the heart of Cold War Europe. You could almost hear it whisper, "You were never meant to find me." Beneath the factory's crumbling exterior, the lab thrummed with controlled chaos. March 12, 1961, still clinging to the chill of dawn, carried a tension that wrapped around Karl like the fog outside. He crept along the narrow catwalks that had been welded over decades-old pits, each step revealing more of the secret world hidden in plain sight. Dr. Emil Voss, a wiry figure with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually furrowed brow, moved between benches covered with glowing instruments. He didn't look up when Karl entered. His hands were steady, almost surgical, as he adjusted the dials on a device that hummed with a low, ominous frequency. Tubes pumped strange liquids, coils crackled with electricity, and the air was heavy with the scent of ozone and machine oil. It was a laboratory that had evolved from necessity and paranoia, a place where science served secrecy above all else. Karl noted the men in gray uniforms stationed at strategic points. They were soldiers, yes, but not ordinary ones. Each carried a notebook filled with schematics instead of rifles, and their eyes were trained on the experiments as if guarding a living organism. Occasionally, a soft beep or metallic click punctuated the silence, signaling another test, another prototype pushed a step closer to operational reality. Impressive, isn't it? Voss's voice cracked like paper, pulling Karl from his thoughts. Years of being invisible in plain sight. They pass by, never noticing. The trucks, the chemicals, the false walls, they think it's just another abandoned factory. But we've built a world under their noses. You could feel the danger pressing in. One wrong move, one stray observation by an outsider, and the secrecy would crumble. Yet the ingenuity was breathtaking. A small drone, no larger than a loaf of bread, hovered above a workstation, its sensors glowing. On another bench, a miniature missile engine whirred to life, sending tremors through the concrete floor. Every piece of machinery seemed to anticipate human movement, responding, adapting, surviving. Karl traced his finger along a wall panel, finding a hidden lever. A section of the concrete wall slid silently aside, revealing a narrow corridor lined with blueprints that detailed operations spanning years, maps, schedules, and coded notes that hinted at ambitions far beyond this secluded site. The factory wasn't just a lab. It was a nerve center, a testing ground for technologies that could tilt the balance of power if ever unleashed. Outside, the fog had begun to lift, revealing the skeletal remains of the factory to the waking town. But no one suspected a thing. Inside, Carl felt it, a strange reverence for the hidden world beneath his feet, a mixture of awe and fear. These were the ghosts behind the walls, unseen yet shaping the Cold War in ways no one outside could imagine. March 13, 1961, 2:17 hours. The factory slept, or at least appeared to. Outside, the wind rattled broken windows, carrying the scent of wet earth and coal smoke from the nearby railway yards. Inside, the hidden lab thrummed quietly, its machinery alive in the darkness. Karl Brenner's boots barely made a sound as he followed Dr. Emil Voss down a spiral staircase into the deepest sublevel of the facility, a cavern of concrete and steel bathed in the eerie green glow of phosphorescent gauges. "This is it," Voss whispered, gesturing toward a cylindrical device mounted on a reinforced steel platform. The object pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. Small servos adjusted its angle, fine wires trailing into the walls. Karl could feel the tension in the air, as if the building itself held its breath. The team of scientists and engineers moved with quiet precision. Each knew their role, each gesture rehearsed for years. A technician keyed a sequence into a control panel, the device responding instantly with a low hum that vibrated through the floor. Outside, the fog thickened, muffling the distant train horns, isolating this hidden world from the town above. Karl crouched near the observation window, eyes fixed on the test. The device, a prototype-guided projectile, was designed to navigate with unprecedented accuracy. This was more than a weapon, it was a statement, proof that the lab was no longer merely experimenting, but producing operational systems capable of shifting the balance of power. Voss's voice broke the tension. "Ready." A single hand motion and the test began. The projectile glided along the guidance rail, sensors adjusting to tiny variations in alignment. Sparks hissed as miniature motors compensated for imperfections in the track. Karl could feel the pulse of energy, a nervous thrill that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Seconds stretched. The projectile completed its path with flawless precision. Not a sound leaked into the town above. Not a single trace would betray the test to the outside world. Karl exhaled slowly, realizing the enormity of what he had witnessed. This abandoned factory was more than a laboratory, it was a sanctuary of innovation, a hidden engine of a Cold War arms race that no one could see, and no one could stop. And yet, in the hum of machinery and the soft hiss of steam, Karl felt an unease settle deep in his chest. For every step forward in secrecy, the stakes grew higher. One discovery, one mistake, and the fragile veil of invisibility could shatter completely. April 2, 1961, 23:48 hours. The town above Wittenberg was silent, yet far beyond its borders, signals blinked on obscure radar screens in Berlin and Moscow. Unbeknownst to Karl Brenner and Dr. Voss, the lab's first successful test had triggered ripples in intelligence networks across both East and West. Satellites weren't needed, human eyes had been watching, and whispers of unusual freight movements and unexplained chemical shipments had reached ears that never slept. Karl stood near the reinforced doors of the main sublevel, the faint scent of ozone and heated metal thick in his lungs. He adjusted his jacket, noting the tension in his team. Voss moved among the machines with his usual meticulous care, but even he paused, as if sensing a change in the invisible currents of the Cold War. Outside the facility, a black sedan crept along the overgrown perimeter road. Two men in dark coats observed the factory with binoculars. Their notepad was filled with sketches and notes, delivery schedules, faint impressions of guard rotations, even approximations of interior layouts, drawn from subtle visual cues. Intelligence was gathering, slowly, like water seeping through cracks. Inside, Karl felt it too. A low hum of unease that couldn't be traced to any machine or device. Something was watching. Perhaps it was paranoia, he told himself, but the sensation persisted. Every sound seemed amplified, the click of a valve, the soft whir of the prototype drone, the distant groan of steel beams settling. And in that awareness, the stakes became undeniable. The factory was no longer just a secret, it was a target. Voss approached Karl quietly. "They'll come. It's only a matter of time." His voice, usually measured, carried an edge of urgency. Not just outsiders. Governments. Spies. Curious eyes from both sides of the wall. Everything we've built, they want it. They'll do anything to get it. Karl nodded, understanding the gravity. 4 years, the abandoned factory had been a sanctuary for invention, a place where the impossible became possible without interference. Now, the game had changed. Shadows were closing in, and every test, every prototype, every whispered plan carried the weight of potential catastrophe. Outside, the fog had returned, curling around broken chimneys and shattered roofs. Inside, the lab hummed with quiet life, aware, in its own way, of the approaching storm. And as Carl peered through the observation window, he realized something chilling. The line between discovery and disaster had grown perilously thin. April 15, 1961, 1:03 hours. The factory seemed quieter than usual, but Carl Brenner knew better. In the shadows beyond the perimeter, movement betrayed the presence of intruders. Two figures slipped along the fog-laden railway embankment, their eyes scanning for patrols, ears tuned to the softest mechanical hums that might give the lab away. Inside, Carl adjusted the dials on a prototype guidance system, his fingers steady but mind alert. The low thrum of machinery was suddenly punctuated by a faint metallic clatter, a sound out of place. He froze, listening. Another clatter, closer. Not a malfunction. Someone was inside. Dr. Emil Voss appeared behind him, his expression tight. "They found a weakness," he muttered. "We knew this day would come. I just hoped it would be later." Carl crept toward the reinforced side door, peering through a narrow observation slit. Two agents, dressed in nondescript dark clothing, were already inside the perimeter, their movements cautious but deliberate. They paused near a stack of crates, one producing a small camera, the other a device that emitted a low-frequency pulse, scanning for hidden machinery. Carl's pulse quickened. Every prototype, every experiment, every carefully concealed blueprint was now at risk of exposure. The factory's secrecy, its greatest strength, was threatened. He could feel the weight of the entire operation pressing down on him, the years of meticulous preparation teetering on the edge of disaster. Voss moved quickly, whispering instructions to the engineers. Prototype drones were activated, small but agile, weaving silently through the dimly lit hallways. Carl followed, directing the drones with precision. The intruders paused, startled by the sudden movement, their devices thrown off by the unexpected countermeasures. The confrontation was brief but tense. One agent tried to breach the inner lab door, but a mechanical arm swooped down from above, narrowly missing him, sending him sprawling into crates. Sparks flew, alarms buzzed faintly, and the laboratory, long dormant in the eyes of the world, asserted itself. When the dust settled, the intruders had fled, leaving behind only scattered footprints and broken equipment. Carl exhaled, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. The breach had been repelled, but the message was clear: the world was closing in, and the sanctuary they had relied upon for years was no longer invulnerable. Outside, the fog had thickened into a suffocating shroud, masking the factory's renewed vigilance. Inside, Carl and Voss exchanged a grim glance. They had won this skirmish, but the war for secrecy, for control, and for the power hidden within the walls of the abandoned factory was just beginning. May 3, 1961, 4:22 hours. A grey dawn seeped over Wittenberg, painting the skeletal factory in pale, cold light. Inside, Carl Brenner moved silently through the labyrinth of machinery, noting every gauge, every hum, every flicker of the fluorescent bulbs above. The events of April had left the team shaken but resolute. They understood now that the lab's experiments were no longer isolated, they had become a point of interest for the giants of the Cold War. Carl paused by a communications console, watching the flickering signals from intercepted transmissions. Moscow had noticed. Washington had noticed. Even neutral intelligence agencies were sending eyes and ears, each seeking a glimpse of what this abandoned factory was hiding. The prototypes that had once existed only in theory were now markers on the invisible chessboard of global power. Dr. Emil Voss appeared, exhausted but composed, clutching a sheaf of notes. "They want our work," he said quietly, almost to himself. "The missiles, the drones, the propulsion systems, they'll stop at nothing to take it. And if they do, there's no telling what the consequences will be." Carl nodded grimly. "We've crossed a line. We can't just hide anymore, we have to anticipate them. Every shipment, every experiment, every test must now be a calculated risk." The lab buzzed with renewed purpose. Engineers and scientists worked in synchronized precision, assembling, testing, and modifying prototypes at an accelerated pace. Each device, each blueprint, became a fortress of secrecy, a puzzle designed not just for innovation, but for survival. Outside, the factory's perimeter was no longer left to chance. Watchtowers, tripwires, and concealed cameras gave the team eyes in every shadow. Yet Carl couldn't shake the feeling that these measures, as sophisticated as they were, might not be enough. The giants of the Cold War had the resources to detect, to infiltrate, to overwhelm. One mistake could turn years of careful secrecy into a global incident. Late that night, Carl walked the upper catwalk, staring at the broken windows and rusted steel beams. He could almost hear the hum of the world beyond, the great powers maneuvering in silence, testing their influence and waiting for a misstep. The factory, abandoned to the untrained eye, had become a crucible of Cold War ambition, and the men and women inside it were both its guardians and its captives. Voss joined him silently. "The question now," he said, voice low, "is not whether they will come, but when. And what we are willing to do to protect this place, and ourselves." June 18, 1961, 3:51 hours. The abandoned factory, now alive with quiet urgency, hummed under the weight of secrets it had carried for years. Outside, the first hints of dawn glimmered against the fog-shrouded town, but inside, the hidden lab pulsed with energy, anticipation, and the unmistakable tension of a final reckoning. Karl Brenner moved among the engineers, his eyes sharp, every step measured. Tonight, they were about to test the culmination of years of clandestine work, a weapon system that, if unleashed, could alter the balance of power. Dr. Emil Voss oversaw the preparations, adjusting the final dials on the massive guidance unit. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he double-checked the calculations. "This is it," he murmured, almost to himself. "Once it goes live, there's no turning back. No hiding. No second chances." Karl felt the weight of those words. The lab had been a sanctuary, a shadow in plain sight, a place where science could push boundaries without consequence. But tonight, that shadow was about to stretch into reality. The prototypes, drones, miniature propulsion systems, guidance units, were positioned across the testing floor, each linked to a central control grid that pulsed with a dangerous rhythm. The team moved with precision, like clockwork, aware that a single error could destroy everything, or worse. Karl keyed the final sequence. A low hum began, growing into a steady vibration that ran through the concrete floors and steel supports. Lights flickered in response, the machines awakening as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Outside, the fog pressed close to the factory walls, hiding the building from prying eyes. But Karl could feel the presence of the world beyond, unseen but inescapable, the gaze of intelligence agencies, the reach of rival powers, the specter of Cold War escalation. Every calculation, every adjustment, every heartbeat counted. Then, with a surge of energy that shook the steel beams, the test began. The central guidance unit powered the drones, launching them silently but with precision across the lab. The smaller systems activated in tandem, sensors and motors synchronizing flawlessly. Karl watched, breath held, as the culmination of years of secrecy unfolded before him. For a moment, the lab existed in perfect balance, innovation, secrecy, and danger interwoven in a delicate harmony. And then Karl realized the truth: they had crossed the point of no return. The technology was no longer theoretical, it was real, operational, and poised to change everything. The factory had become more than a lab. It was now a symbol of the invisible struggle shaping the Cold War, a place where ambition, fear, and human ingenuity collided. Outside, the fog began to lift as dawn's first light cut through the gray. Inside, the machines hummed in quiet triumph, and Karl, standing amid the culmination of clandestine genius, knew that the world beyond would never see them coming, until it was too late.